Good evening, everybody. My name is Doug Mitchell. I have the great privilege of serving as the executive director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy, and I am so delighted tonight to be with some really special people who really with whom I started my career. When I took this job in the summer of 2017, late in the summer, I was told there's nothing to see here. Summer's just about over. Take your time. Nothing's going to happen. Well, the summer of 2017, the fall had different ideas, which put me in community very quickly with Superintendent Jeff Mao, who will be with us, who is with us tonight to talk about this project, with Adele Scholl and Gravity Shots, who I reached out to before the winter started to try and figure out how we could find proof of life of Sperry over the winter. And the amazing Renee Metcalf, many of you will know her as Renee Nofke, her maiden name, from the many important years Renee spent at Sperry and now is with us here at the Glacier National Park Conservancy. As always, the best team in the business makes this happen. Andrew Smith and Gracie Regala are with me tonight. Amy has the night off. And so again, thank you for a great outpouring of support. I know many of you who joined us tonight made significant and early contributions to the Sperry campaign. Thank you. Thank you for joining us again tonight. Believe it or not, the fifth summer now that Sperry is going to be open after the transition, after the rebuild. So it's kind of hard to imagine that it's been that many years. So again, thank you. And when I think about truly, I minimize this because I say it so often, but when I think about joy and I think about kindness and I think about caring, I think about Renee Metcalf. This is a person who we are just so fortunate to have in our lives at the Conservancy. And I know many of you in Zoom are raising a glass to Renee because you've come to know her through your time at Sperry or your time here with the Conservancy. And so I asked Renee to kind of start us off tonight because we're talking about a tragic story to some extent, but really this is about a joyous place. And the way we all came together to protect this joyous place and to bring it back and make sure that future generations could also have access to it. So, Renee, thank you so much for the joy and love you bring to everything you do. And, talk to us a little bit about your journey to Sperry and the joy that it brings you. I know you have a couple photos you're going to share as well. So thank you for again, everything you do.
Yeah, well, it's just such a pleasure to be here, and talking about Sperry is one of my favorite things. So excited to be here with people who are passionate about it too. Yeah, my journey at Sperry, I started my first summer was 2005, which is 20 years ago now. But it was a magical summer. I was just worked with people who had been part of the chalet community for years, and had long histories, family connections to operating the chalets, and really connected with the traditions that made Sperry so special. People come up to the chalet and say, it smells the same, because as they're hiking towards the door, they smell of bread wafting out of the kitchen. So many people who come up to the chalet had been coming there for years, and generations of their family had experienced the chalets together. Other people came up for the first time and just couldn't believe that such a place existed, perched on a mountainside. And people from all walks of life making the difficult hike up that trail, and being in community in this really special place. So, yeah.
So when you started working there, um, at first, was it kind of, I'm not sure this is going to be a thing, or was it love at first sight?
Yeah, I didn't intend to work there for 10 years that first summer. It I was referred to Sperry by a friend who had worked there, and I was so intrigued by her stories of community and the landscape, and was inspired to give it a try myself. But it really sucked me in. I felt like I found my people and my place, and the landscape and just being in that place was just a really special experience. And I kept going back, and I even tried to do other things a couple of times, but kept coming back to Sperry. I think primarily for that sense of community that I found there and for love of place for sure.
And I know you selected a couple of pictures maybe that you would share with us of the chalet, kind of remind us of its history from where it came.
Yeah, I thought just a couple of photos for those who maybe haven't been to Sperry and don't exactly know what it looks like. But this photo is of the hotel building, and it can sleep up to about 50 people if every pillow has a head. And it's just amazing to think that they constructed this building originally in 1912. To think about what it took to get materials and construct this building in that place at that time is really amazing. And then the next photo is of the dining room building. Of course, I picked one out that shows the mules in front. Another thing that makes very special is supplies being delivered by mule. And yeah, so this is the dining room building where a lot of the magic happens because that's where the food is being prepared and served, and folks are gathered around tables in the dining room sharing stories of their hikes and just that sense of camaraderie and being in this place together. So, yeah.
That's awesome. The mules are a reminder that while there was some additional literal lift in 2017, 2018, 2019, with the use of helicopters, mules remained the main way to bring supplies up and down the mountain, even during the construction season. So it's still that's a scene you see, even though those were taken before. That's a scene you'll still see today. So I'm going to come. Don't go anywhere, Renee. I'm going to come back to you. I want to switch over to former superintendent Jeff Mao. Once superintendent, always superintendent. So Jeff, thank you again for joining us, and thank you for a distinguished career in public service in our park and in parks across this country. It means a great deal to so many. You've continued that service as a board member on the Montana Conservation Corps, as a board member on the Friends Alliance of the National Park Friends Alliance. Thank you for that. You and I came to know each other quickly. We had known each other briefly before, but talk to me, even before I arrived, you've got a fire brewing in the park. And as a superintendent, what kind of goes through your mind, and how does that, the safety of the park, the landscape, that's got to be a complicated time.
Yeah, yes, it was, Doug, and it's great to be here, and it's great to be associated with all of you at the Conservancy, and I too early in my career had that experience of showing up at Sperry, and there's Renee with a big glass of lemonade, and oh gosh, it was just had that experience early in my career, and looking back on my career now, I can certainly see that, geez, there were an awful lot of fires when I was superintendent of Glacier, and either my predecessor and since 2018, the park really hasn't had fires anything like they had between 2014 and 2018. And so,
Everyone clearly knocking on wood.
yes, yes. And, but yeah, little did I think that would be such a focus of my tenure at Glacier. And so, yeah, it wasn't, we'd had fires in 2014. We had the Reynolds Creek fire that burned over on the east side in 2015. 16 was the centennial year, so we had a year reprieve. But 17, yes, August 10th seems to be a magic date for Glacier National Park. August 10th, 2017 was the night I think we had 17 or 19 lightning strikes in the park. And there have been many others, of course, around the park. And we put crews on all of them. It's been clear for a number of years, in late summer like that, you need to get on those fires and try to knock them down because the rest of the country's on fire, so you don't have a lot of resources. So yeah, we got on it. I think we put out all but two fires. We were able to put out two lightning strikes, and Sperry happened to be, that lightning strike was on a ridge that we put personnel on it. They had to rappel out of helicopters, and they were there only a few hours before they got the quote hell out of there because of just how steep the terrain was and all the rolling, burning debris that they were having to work around. So yeah, that fire, we sat on it for a number of days, weeks actually, I think, before Sperry actually burned. But looking back on it, that day that Sperry burned was so typical of what we saw through that spate of fires with the wind. And looking back, it's the wind played such a huge role in how those fires burned. But certainly, once we recognize access by trail was shut down, when we closed the trail going up to Sperry, we knew the evacuation was going to have to occur. And I think almost everybody evacuated out through Gunsight rather than down the trail. We swept the trail to make sure nobody was left behind. The fire team moved in. They tried to put as much protective material, prepare the area, close up the windows, put fire wrap on as much as they could get on the building. That's I think when they realized that yeah, there are no ladders up at Sperry, and at least not ladders that would give you access to where you need to protect that building. But they had wrapped a good part of the building with the materials they had. And yeah, the day it burned was a day of what do we call those? Well, fire weather. High winds came up. Sperry, if you think about it, the way it's so beautifully perched on that rock and has such spectacular views, but it's really like perching a building right at the lip of a top of a chimney. And and it was just all those embers from the valley below that blew up. And the times I'd stayed at the dorm before, I think the crew was very good about sort of reading you the riot act about open flames in the building because they knew, it'd been there a long time and things were tinder dry on the inside. And yeah, and so a number of sparks started fires in the Sperry complex. Put the ones that affected the dining hall out because it was readily accessible, easy to access, but the ones that went under the eaves and onto the inside of the main dorm, yeah, nobody knew they were there really because they'd wrapped up the building and just had it so shut up. But anyway, fire burned, and I'll tell you, it was really like for everybody in the park, and I think so many of people who had spent time there, is like the loss of a family member. Just the memories that go with it. Yeah, it really had a very, very tragic feel to it. And people were at a loss. But we knew right away we had to think about our options. And even before the fire had cooled, even when there was still actively burning in the area, is when I think we got together with Tom Bodette from DCI Engineers to get him up there. And it was interesting. He came up from Missoula. He didn't realize, he was going into an active fire area and he didn't have the safety equipment. So literally, Eric Smith took the leather boots off his feet and stuck them on Tom so he could get in there and make that initial assessment about, the stability of those walls, because we knew that was key to preserving any opportunity moving forward. And of course, we had those discussions the day after Sperry burned when Doug and three board members came into my office and you guys were so it was just like the cavalry coming to the rescue of saying, what can we do? And we started lining out the ideas of, how do we just hang on to what we have as we begin the process of thinking about, what's possible, taking those next steps. So yeah, that was quite a period. And looking back on it, like I said, it felt like the cavalry coming to the rescue. I was probably a little stunned, quite honestly, having just got off the telling Washington about what went on. I think they told me I was the first superintendent to burn down a National Historic Landmark. But so So
Oh,
the reputation begins, but no,
yeah, there you go. Well,
it was it was so great, Doug, that you and the board saw right away, the needs of the park, and we're right there when we
well,
had
Dan,
to
don't go too far away because we're gonna continue this conversation. I want to go back to Renee, just to just touch on for a moment because I know it's not your favorite memory, but Renee was there with the evacuation, but also more importantly, I think that um, I like the fact that quickly thereafter you were able to go back there as part of the crew to help with the stabilization. You went up to cook and provide community for the workers. So talk to us about kind of both of those things and the impact it had on you both to walk away from Sperry, but also to be able to go back so quickly, encouraged that there was something in its future.
Yeah, I think Jeff really hit on it, that sense of loss at the time that the chalet burned down. And it's easy to kind of look back on these memories now with maybe a little rosier lens because we know the story has a happy ending. And people are going back up to Sperry and staying and having that experience again. But at that time, that wasn't obvious. And it really felt like maybe this was something we had lost forever. And yeah, deep sadness around that. But yeah, rewinding to the night that the fire started and the evacuation, the storm that created the lightning strike came through right when everyone was in the dining room for dinner. It was one of the most intense storms I had ever experienced in all my years up there. And I'd been through a lot of really impressive storms. The way the wind blew through, it was almost distracting. And even though we had the protection of the dining room building, there was definitely like a sense of uneasiness and discomfort. Kind of tension was high because the storm was so intense and you could really hear it happening and you could hear the lightning but it was fast and furious and blew over really quickly. And by the time we had wrapped up dinner, we were working on dishes and cleaning up the kitchen. Most of the guests had gone out. The sunset was pretty spectacular, and folks were out on the porches watching the sunset, which is a typical scene after dinner up there. But someone noticed a little bit of smoke coming up from behind the shoulder of Mount Edwards and came and reported it. And so that sort of started a process of communicating with the Park Service about, spotting the smoke. And I think they had gotten reports from other people who had seen it from the other side of the lake too, but we were keeping an eye on it. Um, yeah, lots of communication back and forth. Later in the evening, decided that we needed to evacuate everyone the next day and not out the Sperry Trail, the 6.5 miles shorter route down to Lake McDonald. But because that was the direction where the fire was burning, it was safer to send everyone out over the Gunsight Pass Trail, which is twice as long of a hike out, 13.5 miles. I remember a group of gals had just hiked in that way, and it was a major accomplishment that they had gotten to the chalet via that route. And, breaking it to them that they were going to have to turn around and go out that same way the next day. By the time we were really making an evacuation plan, it was dark. And for those of you who have stayed up at this chalet, you know how very dark the hotel building is at night. It is like as dark can be. So, I just have this very vivid memory of wandering around the hotel with my headlamp in the dark, knocking on doors. And of course, everyone can hear everything that's going on. There was one couple in particular whose it wasn't English was not their first language, and I was very uncertain how much they really understood about what I was trying to communicate and what was going on, and spent a lot of time sitting in their room trying to make sure that they understood what we were proposing happened the next day. But yeah, we just encouraged people to get some sleep, but also sort of be packed up and ready to head out in the morning, and made an extra big breakfast and extra big lunches to send everybody off with. We were really fortunate at the time. One of our naturalist guides was up leading hikes, and she graciously offered to be the sweep at the end of the line to make sure that everyone got out. And if she made it to the trailhead, then we could be assured that everyone had made it out safely. So, yeah, it was just a very memorable moment up there, and was really proud of how our crew stayed calm and handled it. And yeah,
And it,
interestingly enough, our crew did not hike out at that time. We stayed up for about another week. And then at that point, the fire had grown to about 500 acres, and was just determined that, like, you are not opening up again soon, so it's time for you to go too. And we closed everything up like it was the end of the season, and left things like ready to go for the next season, and did all of our normal closing procedures, and hiked out over Gunsight Pass. And it was very emotional that day, just kind of, feeling like we did what we could to leave things, really tidy and in good shape. But with that fire burning and growing, just the sense of like, we were like abandoning our dear friend who had housed us all summer. And it was very emotional hiking out. And then it was 2 weeks after that, on the 31st, that the fire finally took the chalet, and the building burned down. So, um,
and it
yeah.
wasn't, you didn't get much of a respite though, because we sent you back up the mountain.
Yeah, so I was so honored to be able to be a part of the stabilization crew. There were 11 of us that went up. We were there for almost 2 weeks. I think we went up on October 4th and came out on the 16th.
And you've
Um,
got a couple of pictures you can share?
yeah, in the stabilization pictures, yeah, so this is sort of
Crazy.
a picture of the shell of the building when the work was first getting started. And you can see sort of the structure at the far end of the building. Those were affectionately called sandwiches. And the crew was constructing these sandwiches across the building. The first couple sandwiches I remember were very slow to come together, and they were really troubleshooting and figuring it out. And yeah, the first couple I remember just took a while to get put together, but then they were on a roll, and the sandwiches really came together. And I think the next picture shows sort of a similar angle on the building, at the far end after all of the sandwiches were constructed. And as you can see, over the course of the couple weeks we were there, we were experiencing mid-October weather, and the snow fell. The other thing that was really a challenge was, October, the days are short by the time October rolls around, and the light was so different than what I had experienced in all my summers up there. And I remember the crew, we would come in for breakfast in the morning, and they'd all be kind of waiting for it to get light out so they could get out and start working. And then we were like rushing to kind of beat the sunset in the evening. But yeah, it was a really impressive group of folks that were up there working on this, and were passionate, and got creative. When you're up at Sperry, Home Depot is a long ways away. And if you don't have, exactly what you need, you get creative and improvise. And I think it was the dream team up there that was able to make it happen. So it was an honor to be there. It was interesting cooking, in the dining room, everything felt pretty normal. So I was down there cooking and making all my recipes. And then once in a while I would, go out and go up to the hotel building and just like break down sobbing, because I remembered, what had happened up there, and just the devastation of the fire. But It was so therapeutic after that sense of loss when the building burned to be in the kitchen cooking again. And I really tried to soak it all in because I thought, this might be the last time I'm, making soup in this kitchen, and who knows what the future will hold. And it was a really emotional time, but really just a privilege to be up there and be part of that. So,
Well, and Renee, you should know that in the chat there are many people who are just delighted to see you again.
oh,
You mean so much to so many. And Jeff, it was then we're going to skip forward and then come back to Adele, but we're going to skip forward to the next summer when you and I had the chance. The contract had been let, the public meetings had happened, Adele had showed us proof of life, and we were able to hike up together. It was a very special, something I will always hold dear to me. We were able to hike up together the day before the construction was to start, and slept in the rafters of the maintenance shed, as I remember. And you wanted to make sure that you greeted and shook the hand of every person, and I just that is a sense of leadership to me that I've always treasured and tried to learn from. And talk to us a little bit about what that was like to be the superintendent of the park, to be there when the crew showed up, to be there with your crew because the native plant nursery crew was there, others were there, the cultural resources team. It was really actually going to happen. This thing that we pretty much thought was impossible was actually going to be possible.
Well, I think the going up there with you, Doug, which was such an amazing experience, really was sort of like the end of a significant phase in the rebuild of Sperry, and that was all the planning that went into
Mm-hmm.
it. Not only, what were our options are, the public meetings we had, a lot of decisions, meeting with Ryan Zinke, who was the secretary at the time, and who, did an amazing job in providing funding for it. I mean, so many things came together in such short order without a lot of hiccups. It was really quite remarkable. And the project carried so much momentum with it. I mean, honestly, hiking up just seemed like it was the right thing to do. It was the way to sort of kick off this construction phase in a way that was meaningful. And I just thought it was a great idea to go up there and to go up there with you. And I think that when the workers got off, they were a little bit sort of stunned and trying to wonder, so who is this guy here? Because we hadn't been really introduced to them beforehand. But I think later, because we made subsequent visits, they really came to appreciate the fact that we were there to greet them when they got there, and that was, um, you know, I think it conveyed to them just the importance of it.
And that brief video we showed was of Jeff greeting the Dick Anderson construction workers as they were making their way up the stairs to where would be their sleeping platforms during the construction. And I was taken that night before to stand in the ruin and realize that that's the last day it was going to be a ruin. And that because of this partnership that you mentioned, I had the chance to see Congressman Zinke recently and thank him for his leadership when he was secretary. Really, it was this coalition of people, and our conservancy community. We committed $110,000 for this stabilization project, and we had not a nickel. I had no authority from my board when I did it. We had a credit card. That's it. And we took the credit card down and bought $3,000 worth of lumber. But within hours, our Glacier community had responded and said, "We've got your back. Let's do this. Let's make this happen." And that's so powerful to have this power of partnership, right? And I felt that day with you, and I think that's one of the special things about our park and our community is that partnership. And speaking of partners, I found a partner. I can't quite remember, Adele Scholl, how I reached out to you. I think maybe I just Googled um, aerial photography or something, and I emailed you out of the blue because it dawned on Jeff and I somewhere around January that a lot of money was being spent in preparation for a construction season. Architectural drawings were being built, bids were being done, and we probably should check and see whether in fact the stabilization work was going to work. So you were so kind and immediately just said, I'm in. I don't care what I have to do, because there are limitations, right? This would have been kind of an easy drone piece, but drones not allowed in the national park. We had to find a workaround for that. You did, and so kind of talk us into how that relationship. Do you remember it the same way that I do? And then we can slide into your first flight which caused you to take a snowmobile ride. And anyway, let's remember all of that together.
Yeah, I remember you calling me and saying that you were referred to us just because, our passion is aerial photography. So we like to capture things from the air. And at first I thought it was a little crazy to be trying to go into Sperry to get pictures from the air, from an airplane, to check the progress if it was under an avalanche or not. And I was thinking, gosh, how are we going to do this? And why are we going to do this? But then, we all agreed that it was a good idea to get up there. And Red Eagle and Dave Horner, who was mentioned last week, he flew us in, and it was actually not until February, I think, that we were able to get in there and get some of the first pictures and see what condition it was.
Well, you're very kind to say that you thought the idea was nuts. You would not be the first to say Mitchell's just nuts. I don't know what the guy's thinking. And thanks for mentioning Dave Horner. And for those of you who missed the reference to last week, Dave was mentioned early and often in our conversation with The Woman with Wolves, and the great book that Diane has written. And we did a book, Glacier Book Club, on that. It's on YouTube if you want to look at it. Some great Dave Horner flying stories. But as I remember it, Adele, and again, this is about, just people who are willing to put in. You were on a backcountry outdoor trip with your husband and got a call like in your tent and had to take a snowmobile to a car to a plane to do this photography.
Yeah. We've done a lot of pretty remote jobs, packing in drones, and Jeff's done a lot of production work, filming for Mountain Men. And yeah, I think we were out in the woods when you kind of came up with this idea, and we said we were coming back, and and thought right away of Dave Horner because he has thousands of hours in the mountains. And yeah, just weren't sure that it would be possible to get up there, but he certainly flew us in.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we did this over two seasons so that we could, one of the things that Jeff and I will always remember is sitting at our conference table, and Secretary Zinke and some of his staff were there. This is before the winter of 2018. And he just said, I want to be clear. There will be a roof on Sperry Chalet by the time the snow falls. And someone briefly tried to argue.
Yeah.
But there was a roof. So, and I thank you, Adele. You've put together some photographs some people have seen, some never before seen. So if you would walk us through your photos, they're amazing. And talk to us about whatever you want to talk about, the process, what it was like, what it meant to you. And folks, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and Gracie's going to curate some question and answer here in a bit.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll just walk through some pictures pretty quickly. This is the 206 Cessna that Red Eagle took us up in, and a couple of the cameras that I took. Also shooting out of airplane windows with cameras and video cameras, very challenging. Also depending on the conditions, and everybody knows what the winter is like in Montana here, trying to get a sunny day to get in to see Sperry Chalet. So this is kind of the view from the back seat, and Dave Horner's in the left, and Jeff, my husband's also a pilot. He's in the right seat there. And one time we had the amazing opportunity of going up for a training run with the alert helicopter. So that was a little easier to get in there. And this kind of shows you Sperry in its environment and how hard it is to get to by air, especially on the backside of it. To try to get any photos from the backside, you really have to get down in there.
And you can see from that photo why there was some concern about seeing whether the walls were still up, right? In terms of the location is such a steep slope that a lot of snow could build up. There could be an avalanche. And these photographs, and when you're standing at Sperry, it looks a lot different, but these photographs really show you, the tenuous nature of its location.
Yeah, yeah. Once we got up there, I did agree with you. Anne was amazed that Sperry was still standing after all these years. And now here's one with the snow pretty close in.
This is just a remarkable photograph. It reminds me of whipped cream.
Yeah, yeah. You never know what the snowpack's like, and you got a good view at the chimneys there and the sandwiches. Be a little too big, but yeah, you can kind of see every day wasn't the best day to get up there, but here's another one. Now we're kind of coming in the spring, so things are melting off a little bit, and you could see, just what the winter did to it. Yeah, somehow, you guys were able to stabilize it and keep the walls and the original structure intact there.
Because that's a lot of snow in there. You don't even see the first floor windows, right? So
Yeah.
we're at the second floor at this juncture, and certainly in the deep of winter, it was probably even higher than that.
Yeah, now these are the next winter. You have a roof on it like you promised. Even
And
more
the roof held
snow.
up, which is,
Yeah.
that's the other reason we wanted to go back in. Again, people are spending a lot of money on architectural design, other things, getting ready for the season. You want to make sure that that's taxpayer money. You want to make sure, and donor money. You want to make sure that that's being well used. And so it was great to get these pictures.
Yeah, we never, quite knew what we were going to get here.
Now, I will admit, and this is a story I probably should have told a few slides ago, but I generally try to be just very, thoughtful and kind and a pretty good listener. And so Adele had, rushed to the airport, taken these shots. She was going to be leaving town, and I am like a cot on a hot tin roof because I want to know, like, are the walls standing? And so I think I emailed Adele and said, so, how'd it go? Was it, did you be able to get up in the air? Yeah, it was great. I'll send you some pictures. I'm like, no, okay. I have to be more direct. Are the walls standing? Yes or no?
Yeah, I think we were going somewhere and we
Yeah,
couldn't really get them edited down quick enough for you. And,
that's all I needed to know. The walls are standing.
yeah, yeah, they were somehow,
So
it
these are
was
the
so
other
important.
outbuildings that Renee was talking about. For those who might not be familiar with Sperry, on the far left-hand side, there is the dining room, correct, Renee?
Yeah, I think the far left is the dining room and then the bathhouse there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it held the test of time with holding up, all that snow.
So
This was an interesting one here.
Yeah,
You
lots
can
of
kind
animal
of
tracks.
see, yeah, the tracks and the visitors.
So what surprised you the most as you were doing this, Adele?
Um, Well, how much snow was there for sure. And just that we actually do get some sunny, nice days once a month in the winter to get up there. But I think, just the whole being part of the whole project and like you and Jeff were saying, how everybody came together on it. And, it's an integral piece of history of the park. Only 2 chalets left out of, how many, 12, 13. Um,
So
yeah.
give us I'm not, what's the perspective of this one?
Oh, this is Mount Brown Lookout, and there's
Oh, God,
actually somebody that hiked up. You can see them there next to the lookout that
you
skied
can.
in. So these were just some of the things that we would see when we would go up there. And that one is the visitor center. So we had flown out Gunsight Pass and went up to look at the visitor center. And that's the visitor center that I think 2018.
Completely buried in snow.
Yeah, yeah. Now we're kind of melting off here and looking good. Um, sorry about that. There we go. And there is the finished product I was able to dough in August of 2020.
Incredible.
And actually see it from the ground. So that was a different perspective for sure.
2020 did not have a lot of highlights, but this is one of them.
Yeah.
This is one of them for sure. And I thought about that the other day because, again, one of these partnership pieces, as you'll remember, there was a government shutdown in 2019. And because we were in between years, the initial thought was that work on this project could not continue during the government shutdown because it was 2 1-year contracts to do this. And to be honest, I was in an airport and Senator Daines was in the airport. And I used to work for a United States Senator and I never wanted to be this guy, but I was that guy. And I went up to Senator Daines and I said, I need a favor. And he said, what is it? And I said, I need for you just to confirm for me, perhaps by a call to whoever that work on Sperry will continue because it is a 2-year project. And by the time I landed, Jeff and I had been informed that work on Sperry could continue because I think had that not happened, it would have been 2020. And as we know, there would have been no construction in 2020. And so just getting after it when we did and continuing to be after it and asking everybody to come together as a community, irrespective of political party background, social background, it really took a village to make sure that this place could get rebuilt. And Adele, you played a really critical role. And the beauty of this photography, this story is going to be an historic one. And the beauty of this photography, I think, is something that I hope of which you are very proud, because I think generations and generations and generations from now, your photography is going to be a part of this very compelling piece of Montana and American history. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, I have also scanned historical photography of the area from early 1900s. And so I often think I try to place myself back into those photos. So it's nice to hear that maybe somebody will be looking at our photos, 100 years from now and really thinking about what you did. You helped rebuild Sperry.
Well, it took a village, as I said. And speaking of a village, we've got a village of people online here. And Gracie, I'm sure that you have a pile of questions in the chat, so I'd like to hand it over to you and let's get into some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Some really amazing stories in the chat and people talking about the emotional experiences at Sperry and what a wonderful place it is. But I do have a few logistic questions from big friends of our Glacier events and of the Conservancy, Carl and Candy's fire, and they were wondering about if permits were required and who did the construction inspections, and also about if the native plant nursery supplied the plants and seeds for replanting and how all that worked. So I think that would probably be a Jeff Mao question. How did the logistics all work? Who did the inspection?
Well, it was a federal project. So whenever there's a federal project with a contractor on board, and it's interesting. The contractors, they all seem to have the name Anderson. So whether it's the architects, Anderson Hallis, Dick Anderson out of Helena was the construction. We had Anderson Masonry who came in. It was really interesting from that aspect. But yeah, so when a contract is let, there is a government inspector that is on site and does, they're the ones that, whether it's on a daily or several times over the week, they do go in and they do the inspections for it. It has to meet universal building code. So we use a universal building code, that standard that we use. And because it's a historic structure, sometimes the building code doesn't quite fit. So we do, I couldn't tell you what exceptions were granted. We also work closely with the State Historic Preservation Office. The support from the state was fantastic. The SHPO was readily available, in from the ground up. So, in terms of the meeting the permits, meeting historic standards, all of that, everything just flowed. I like to say there were so many things that could have gone wrong on a project like that. You just saw the photos of the incredible location it's at. So many things could have gone wrong, and nothing did. Even Dick Anderson was just amazed that, given the extremes of this the setting and elsewise, there were no real hiccups. I like to think of it as a once in a career kind of project to be associated with.
And Carl and Candy, I can add that one of the crews that was up there when Jeff and I arrived was the native plant nursery team, and they were marking off because, of course, there were going to be a lot of construction crews. So they were trying to make sure to lessen the impact to the flora up in the area. So they created pathways. They created the sleeping area and the pathways. And so they were involved literally from before the project began. And again, that's just so cool to have that team and their forward thinking ability to protect the resource. It's really quite incredible. Good question.
Yeah, absolutely. In a similar vein, we're seeing in some of the pictures some of the trees are still there and the plants are coming back. But Cheryl asked, since she hasn't been back since 2016, what is the landscape like today around the chalet building? And of course, are the goats around? Business as usual with the goats. I know Renee and Doug, you both probably stopped by and have some animal encounter stories.
Yeah, I would say, hiking up to Sperry now, the fire in that drainage burned in a very mosaic-y kind of way. So there are plots that are very fire affected, and you can see the burn, and then there are other sections of the trail where the fire kind of skipped over, and you would never know anything happened. And the view, when you're kind of looking out at the valley from the hotel building, you can see some of those sort of plots that kind of stand out as being very burned, and then others that don't. When you're over near Lake Ellen Wilson and looking back into the Lincoln drainage, that's a very different story. That drainage burned so hot, and I think the fire really picked up steam as it moved in that direction, and that just looks, yeah, completely devastated by fire. So just kind of interesting that even though those two drainages were impacted by the same fire, they burned in very different ways.
And the
And what
goats are
about the
back.
goats?
The goats are back.
They're thriving. You can check them off your worry list. They're doing great.
That's one of the instructions when you're at dinner. Please make it all the way to the bathroom at night because the goats will follow you.
Yes.
And Gracie, we also have some prizes tonight. If I'm not mistaken, you have the last
Yes.
6 Sperry patches.
Yes, and I think Andrew has our winners, so he'll put them in the chat here since there's 6 of them. But if you see your name in the chat, send an email to info@glacier.org to claim your prize, and then we'll coordinate how to get your little patch to you.
Awesome. Okay, what else you got in terms of questions, Gracie?
Yeah, here's another kind of logistics one that Doug or Jeff might know the answer to, but how many crew members were actually working on Sperry at one time, and how did they get the power for their tools, or was it all hand cranking?
Well, so they were allowed to use generators up there, and they charged battery packs. So yeah, they were able to use power tools out there. So that wasn't so much an issue for them. But it was interesting. I'll say one thing though. The crews themselves decided that they would hike in and out each time there was a swap of a crew. And Doug, I forgot the intervals that it would be. It was at must have been more than 5 days. I think
I
it
think it
maybe
was 7.
seven.
Yeah, I
And
think it was Mondays was the switchover day.
yeah, but they all, and I honestly, I think Takander said, we're not flying you guys in and out. But I was amazed, and it would be a competition amongst them to see how many could go in there. And the most I ever saw in there, and there's the prime construction crew, but then also specialists would be there at any one time. So it could be engineers overseeing things going in or taking measurements, masons coming in to do certain things. So, boy, I I guess there could have been upwards of 20 people at one time there. I mean, they did have large temporary tent platforms for sleeping there. Um, and on the calls I was with contractors, you'd hear about, how, well, I'm not going to be there this week. You can use my spot. So, they work seamlessly together to ensure that things move smoothly up there. But maybe Renee has a better sense of total numbers that could have been up there because you guys would have been serving meals. I'm not sure if you were, but
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think you're in the ballpark. So,
Yeah, they had two crews, so there were 2 crew captains, and they were very different people. And it was very interesting to see the 2 different types of crews. One more casual, one very military. But they got along unbelievably great. And they, as Jeff mentioned, they did have a contest among the willing of who could get up the trail the fastest. And for most of you have gone up that trail. It is no bargain. And I don't remember what the time was. It was somewhere around an hour, which, as people said, was fine early in the season when there was copious amounts of water for showers. Later in the season, starting the week with that guy having run up there in an hour was a little less fun. But they loved it. I mean, I think I still see those guys, and this was an experience of a lifetime for them, living in the park, off the grid for the most part, doing something with their hands. And the handwork here is just absolutely extraordinary. Yeah, this kind of project I don't think comes along very often in the life of a contractor.
I think one of the best stories I heard from one of the contractors, and this is when they were digging the holes for the footings for the new structure, and somebody who had dug a hole for a new footer had got it all finished, went to bed, and came back the next morning, and the hole was all filled in. And he thought, "What the heck? Somebody's playing a trick on me." And then he noticed over in the corner there's a mountain goat whose front nose was just covered in dirt.
Take the salt from wherever they can get it.
Yeah.
else you got, Gracie? I saw
Yeah.
one about a puzzle piece.
Yes, the puzzle piece.
Yeah, that was fun, and I appreciate. Was that Cheryl?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Hey, Cheryl. Thank you. One of the things that I thought about, and we kind of talked about it tonight, this kind of was like putting together a puzzle. So that's one of the things we did is we had a puzzle made of Sperry, and then we sent out the pieces and said, hey, you know, whether or not you can contribute, write your name on the back, send it back in, help think about helping us put this puzzle back together. Because I think, and a lot of people, thank you, sent in checks with that. Some signed the back and sent it in because that kind of inspiration for us, really was super helpful to keep. I mean, keep in mind, this is an organization in its entirety in 2013 that gave the park $800,000. 4 years later, we're doing $1 million lift for this in 1 year. That's a game changer for us, and we couldn't have done it without such an outpouring of support. We had 1,100 new donors to the Glacier Conservancy as a result of Sperry. About 2/3 of those who have continued to donate to us. And so, we're so very thankful for that, because that's helped us, up our game. And I think our work with the park, one of the projects we're working on right now is a school to park program, as we're trying to motivate and help the next generation of Dick Anderson people in a partnership with Columbia Falls High School, where we're supporting with the park and Columbia Falls High School the construction of housing units for rangers in Glacier National Park with the shop class at Columbia Falls High School. We did a Glacier Conversation with them a couple of months ago, and that's another thing we're trying to fund. And if that floats your boat, you can make a gift to that program here in our chat as well. So, Gracie, I think we've got a couple more minutes. If we got another question, we'll get to it.
Yeah, and talk about puzzle, the school to park project. They're also working on this complicated piece to put together a backcountry cabin near Granite, which is the other chalet in the park. And
yeah.
I got to see it, and it is a complicated puzzle. One question about the planning and execution of the rebuild, but were any systems put in place to help prevent another fire from burning down Sperry, or are there limitations as a historic building with adding that type of thing?
Well, a fire suppression system, they looked long and hard at doing that, and it really didn't seem like it was feasible from an engineering perspective. One of the things they know that, the old building had a lot of drafts in it, and it's just an old building. The masonry was old, and the building itself had breathed, and on windy days you could feel the air coming through. So that's probably how that ember got in. The building now is much tighter than it was. They also put in eyelet bolts that would allow for people to have safety access at that second level if they should need to access it again, to put fire wrap on it or put something on it. The roof is fire rated, even though it is a wooden roof. But that was part of the maintaining the historic character of the building, which was required. So yeah, it was looked at very carefully in terms of how can we prevent these sorts of things from happening again. But looking back, the fire investigation, that it was clearly embers that had gotten on into the interior of the building, and they've done, I'm sure that building is very tight compared to where it was before.
And there are exit signs, so that's good. We got that going for us.
Right. And minimal lighting now.
Minimal lighting, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think if we declared on this call that it was fireproof, we'd be wanting to knock on a lot of wood.
Like exactly. Well, Adele, Renee, Jeff, thank you very much for your time. Everybody, thank you for just a wonderful evening of sharing and richness. It's great to remember this project and place, and most important, the times together, right? That's what Sperry's about, sitting around the dining room and standing out on the balcony. I'm so enriched by the time I've spent with Jeff and Adele and Renee, of course. Thank you for that, and for the rest of you, thanks for being such an important part of this Glacier community. We really couldn't do anything. We don't do anything without your support, and we don't do anything without the park's incredible leadership. And you know, having somebody like Jeff, even though we're mad when Jeff retired, because he's Jeff, the next guy who wants to be Jeff takes that job, and he's an amazing guy too. Dave Romer is a super person who wants to step into big shoes. And you know, the way I think about it, because of your generosity, we provide the park with somewhere around a 20 to 25% lift in their operating budget every year, about $4 million this year. But what that really means is that the park staff is saying to themselves, for the same amount of money we make, we'll take some money from the Conservancy and we'll do 20% as more work. And that's the kind of dedication that we're getting from our public servants that is really worth supporting. So that's why I do this job, because I get to work with the best team in the business, the best partners in the business, and be supported by the best supporters. Thank you for being in this work with me. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next Glacier Conversation or our next Glacier Book Club, or stop by the office, or let's go on a hike together. Thanks, everybody, and good night.